The NHL draft is a week away, and today we're talking about a player who has been in the top 20 and is falling down everybody's draft boards. We're trying to figure out why that is on today's Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get any further, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and also over on YouTube. So if you haven't hit subscribe over there, please feel free to do so. And we're also on Sirius XM, which is super, super exciting. I just want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, today's show, like I said, the draft is in a week, which is way sooner than I thought. Time just keeps on happening. So we've got a couple of draft profiles to get through this week. And today we're going to be talking about a kid called Luca Pinelli, who, like I said, people had him pretty high up their draft boards, probably in the first round, about when I started doing my draft prep back in February. And then he just started plummeting down the draft board. So I've got Hadi Kalakeche here, host of Locked on NHL Prospects, head of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospect. And we're going to talk to him about why that is, whether the Blue Jackets could take a flyer on him in the second or third round, and whether he could end up surprising people. So that's all coming up in just a minute on Locked on Blue Jackets. So the Blue Jackets lost their 22nd overall pick in a trade a couple of weeks ago. So instead of kind of looking at who might be available at 22nd, we've kind of pivoted a little bit here on Locked on Blue Jackets. We're looking at players that might be available at 34th or possibly even later. So today I've got Hadi Kalakeche of Locked on NHL Prospect, of Dobber Prospects. Today we're going to be talking about a player called Luca Pinelli, who was a guy that was kind of hovering around about the 15 to 20 range when I started my draft prep. And I was looking at the Elite Prospects kind of draft guide earlier today just to kind of do a little bit of prep for this show, and he is 82nd in their rankings. And so some places have him ranked a little higher, some places have him ranked a little lower, but I guess I want to talk about that, but let's start off with kind of when Luca Pinelli kind of gets on the ice for a game, what are you getting from him as a player?
You're getting great intelligence. I think he's a high-end thinker of the game. He's very comfortable slowing it down, going to the middle, but he's also got a great motor about him. He's got that combination with smarts and intensity that I really like. But the knockbacks on his game and the things that have kind of made him go down the rankings are mainly the fact that his puck skills are about average across the board. Usually he's able to compensate for that, especially at the OHL level, especially in the chair that he's in right now in Ottawa. He's well surrounded. He's got teammates that can push the pace for him, that can get around defenders. Mainly his job is to cut to the middle, draw them in, and then open up space on the flanks, which he does really well. It's just a matter of whether that's going to work at the NHL level. But what you're getting out of Fantilli is a very smart and very driven player who's constantly going to find the middle of the ice and constantly going to try to make things happen there.
Is he, so we talked, I mentioned a little bit, he was, I think the initial ranking I was looking at was Tony Ferrari's like mid-season draft rankings. And, we love Tony Ferrari on the show. He's very smart. He had him ranked, I believe, 21st then. And that was in like February.
Yep.
4 months later, what happened?
Yeah, well, it became increasingly obvious that Pinelli didn't have that high-end foot speed first in order to get around players, in order to make things happen in transition. But it also got increasingly obvious that, he's got a good shot, he's got good hands, but they're nothing out of this world. His passing's about average, but I'd say his passing's a bit better than his shot. It's just really underused right now because he's kind of put in a triggerman position on the power play. So you see a lot of his shot. I really, really like his playmaking as well, but none of his puck skills are anywhere near the level that a guy with his foot speed and his lack of physicality should have. So that's the main concern with him. He has a similar kind of profile to a Zach Benson, but Zach Benson has probably the best playmaking in this draft, point blank, and has a great shot and has great hands. and is even smarter than Pinelli and is more capable physically than Pinelli. So even though they're similar profiles, it's like Benson has everything up 2 or 3 notches. So I'd say Pinelli's kind of a C or D version of Zach Benson. And it's just about how much you value that and how much you think that's going to translate. Because like I mentioned, a lot of his plays are slowing plays down, pushing the middle, holding onto the puck for just the right amount of time in order to open up a teammate. But once he gets to the NHL level, he's going to need to up that pace. He's going to need to, improve his skill set in order to make plays at a higher pace, at a higher speed, and kind of react quickly, make one-touch passes, that kind of thing. And the problem for me, and especially he's dropped in my rankings as well. He was in my first round in April. But the more I watch of him, the more I realize, like, man, there are some concerns about his translatability, and it's going to be very tough for him to do what he does right now in the OHL at the AHL or NHL level. So his game kind of needs to mold a bit or change, which isn't really good when you're trying to draft in the first round. You want a player whose game is already kind of, you can already see that game translate well. But when a player needs to modify their game in order to be impactful at the NHL level, that's when they start slipping into the second or third rounds, because there's extra steps in their development that you need to take. And extra steps means extra variables, which means extra possibilities of them not working out. So that's kind of the concern with Pinelli.
Yeah, for sure. Is that something that you think like an NHL team can, like, do you think there are NHL teams that will look at that and be like, oh, I can fix that? Like I know
Oh, yeah.
Columbus values their development team very
Mm-hmm.
highly, and I think they do a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if he's going to be one of those guys that, falls in the draft and then suddenly they turn around and are like, oh, actually, this kid's going to be sick. It feels
Oh,
like
yeah.
there's things in his game that can be fixed, I guess.
Yeah, there's some tweaks you can bring to his game that'll make him a much better player, a much more impactful player. Now, the thing with Pinelli is his physical skill set. So his leg strength, his upper body strength, his core strength aren't up to par. So a lot of what's going to make him better is filling out that frame. And that's less on the technical development team and more on the physical development team, on your dietitians, on all that. If you got a solid base of that, you can make a really good player out of Pinelli. Because if that physical skill set goes up a couple notches, Pinelli won't have to change his game as much. But if he stays about on the same range he is, a 5'9", maybe fills up to 175, 180 pounds, then you're talking about an overhaul of the way that he plays a game. He's smart enough to adapt his game. He's very adaptable, and I think that he won't have that much of a problem adjusting his game. But that adjustment does take away from things that he needs to relearn. He needs to redo some things. So the time frame to get him to the NHL is a bit longer, and second, that uncertainty is going to turn off some teams. Now, I still have Pinelli in my 40s. I'm nowhere near as low as Elite Prospects is on him. I especially like his defensive input, the way that he fills space in the defensive zone and all that. I don't think that's going to have to change one bit. It's just his game with the puck that'll need to modify. So a good enough team with a well-rounded development team. So not a development team that's 90% invested in technical development and developing hockey sense and puck skills and all that. The team that's kind of 50-50 on having good physicians, dietitians, physical coaches. We're going to get him in the gym room, get him working on his weight, but also have that technical aspect. Are really going to have a good time with Pinelli. So if that's the case for the Blue Jackets, I think he's a great pick in that range. Maybe not at 34, but if there's a second pick in the 50s and the 60s, I'm pretty sure he's going to slip into that range, and that would be a great pickup at that point.
In a minute, we've got more from Hadi and myself about Pinelli, but first I've got to let you know about eBay Motors, because the championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit, and it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts or accessories, head on over to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. All you have to do is add your ride to my garage, look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you get your money back. It's just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to US customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Yeah, I believe the Blue Jackets' next pick after that is 66, but I could be wrong. I don't remember how math works, but so yeah,
Yeah.
it could be a kind of a third round kind of guy. I feel like I've asked this question with literally every single prospect that I've kind of looked at that plays forward anyway. He's listed as a center on Elite Prospects. The Blue Jackets have, I feel like, just so many middle six centers and no elite centers. But I feel like having too many middle six centers is not necessarily a bad thing. Is that kind of where you think his ceiling is? Do you think he could be like a third or maybe even a second line center, or is his game probably going to translate better to the wing in the NHL?
I think he would make a good center because of his defensive acumen. He's really, really smart, especially off the puck, constantly supporting defensemen on the breakout. When he feels that his defensemen are getting pressured, you can always find him below the hash marks, making himself an option for an outlet. That's a very good habit for centers. Now, as the years have gone on, it's less been centers and wingers and more F1, F2, F3 in NHL kind of tactical formations. So the difference between center and wing is a lot smaller than it used to be, especially if you can mold your tactical lineup for that line in order to put Pinelli in that F1 position where he's helping his defenseman out of the zone. He's really, really good at that. So center or wing, I don't think matters too much. It's just a matter of what role he plays on his line. And if he's the guy who's helping his defenseman out of their zone, connecting with teammates going up the wings, that's a great spot for him. Now, usually that's your center. So if we're going with the traditional kind of idea of what a center is, I feel like Pinelli fits that well. Not the fastest, not the strongest, not the type of guy who's going to barrel down the wings and drop the shoulder and head to the net, which is usually the winger's role. But a guy who's going to slow the game down, he's going to push the middle, he's going to find pockets of space and transition, and has good enough playmaking to connect regularly with his teammates in good zones. So he's one guy that I would say, despite the size, would make a really good center if we're going with the traditional role of a center.
Yeah, for sure. You talked a little bit about kind of his timeline to the NHL is going to be a little bit longer because he's going to go later on in the draft. He's got, I believe, 2 more years of OHL eligibility. Do you think then it's to the AHL, to the NHL? What do you like? Where do you see his timeline in terms of when he's going to be ready?
Definitely AHL. After finishing his OHL stint, I feel like a great spot for him to learn how to play with a higher pace, how to play with more physical intensity, how to win board battles is definitely the AHL, because the AHL is a very bounce prone league. It's not a league that's very predictable in terms of where the puck is going to go, which is very similar to the OHL in a sense. The OHL is even more kind of bouncy and unpredictable, but there's less of a physical element. And the guys you're facing are of your age, whereas in the AHL, you could be going up into the boards against a 6'2", 200-pound, 30-year-old defenseman. And then what do you do, right? That's my concern with Pinelli. And I feel like seeing a lot of those scenarios in the AHL for a year, 2, 3 is really going to help him unlock some parts of his game that I feel are missing right now. So it's just a matter of exposure, right? Because in the OHL, he's not getting exposed to too many of those scenarios. But once he hits the AHL, that's when we're going to know whether or not Pinelli is a translatable prospect. Because right now in the OHL, he's just not facing the scenarios in order for us to see whether that's the case or not.
Yeah, for sure. He's definitely, like I said, he's a guy that I've kind of been vaguely paying attention to basically since I started my draft prep and watched him kind of fall down the boards. But if the Blue Jackets, and I did double check, their next pick after 34 is 66. Their third round draft pick, but it's like 2 picks into the third round.
Yeah.
So he could be a really interesting player. I'm reminded a lot of, and I don't think it's exactly the same situation, but when the Blue Jackets somehow managed to get Stanislav Svozil in the third round, of a guy that had some flaws, sure, and then had kind of a down year in his draft year and, fell all the way into the third round and into like the late 60s. So it could be maybe not a similar thing, but Pinelli, I feel like, is primed and ready to be a guy that is not a star necessarily, but I feel like he might be one of those guys that you look at in 5 years and are like, oh, how did he fall all the way to third?
It was kind of the same concern as it was with his brother, Francesco Pinelli, in his draft year. He got picked up by the Kings in the second round. I thought he was a fantastic prospect. He was in my top 10. He's been doing great so far in Kitchener in the OHL. There were some concerns at the start of the year with his progression and how we'd be able to kind of work his way up And he's still in the OHL right now. He's not the type of guy who made the jump early. He's not playing the NHL right now. It's been a couple of years since his draft year. He's still kind of working out the kinks of his game. But he's one of the best players in the OHL, and it's really everything revolves around his smarts. And it's kind of the same thing for Luca, but Luca has less of a skill set than Pinelli did. So Francesco Pinelli is what I hope Luca Pinelli turns into after 2 years in the OHL. Now, Pinelli's definitely going to be kind of in the contention for a spot on LA next year or maybe the year after. Whereas, I think that's a similar timeline to Luca Pinelli. It's just I think Luca might need an extra year in the AHL compared to Francesco. So that's how I see them. And obviously, Francesco Pinelli's playmaking is absolutely out of this world, and his shot is ridiculously good as well, which I can't say for Luca. So that's the difference for me, is that they're going to have to play different styles given the different skill sets.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's gonna be really interesting, and I think I'll be kind of maybe not paying a ton of attention or as much attention as I will be to some of the guys that I really like that I think should go in the first round. But I think Pinelli is a guy that could surprise people in a couple of years.
At 66 is great value. If he's the pickup at 66, I think that's a great pickup. Like I said, he's 45th in my rankings, so I still value the skill set. I still highly value hockey sense and intensity, two things that are almost inherent to players. They're very rare to develop. It's very rare to take someone who doesn't have a high-end motor and to just tell them to be more intense. It's not really how it works. And same thing for hockey sense. It takes a lot in order to make a player smarter than they actually are. But Pinelli has those two bases, and I feel like skills are much easier to develop than the inherent mental elements of a player. And he has those mental elements locked down. So it's just a matter of improving the skill set, making him add some weight, and you've got an NHLer.
Yeah, for sure. Let's wrap this episode up. Now that the Blue Jackets have gotten rid of that 22nd overall pick and killed my dreams of them bringing Gavin Brindley to Columbus, they pick third, and then they don't pick again until 34th. We've spent a lot of time talking about who the Blue Jackets are going to draft at third. Who would you take at 34th if you had the chance?
That is a great question. It really depends on who's available. I feel like there's some guys who I have in my top 15 who could slip all the way to 34. Two guys I'm thinking about are Andrew Crystal and Jaden Perron. Those are two guys that have really raved about all year. They're two of my favorite prospects in this class, and I feel like both have been slipping for the wrong reasons. I feel like Andrew Crystal, the inconsistency is frustrating, but on his day, he is a fantastic player. He might end up being a top 5 scorer out of his class if he learns to be more consistent. And I'm less concerned with inconsistency when you can show those flashes of elite skill, and Crystal definitely does. Even Connor Bedard called him the smartest player he's ever played with. So that's a compliment from a guy you'd like to hear from regarding hockey sense, sure. Right? So that's one guy I'd really consider. Tremendous shot, one of the best shots in the WHL, and that's saying something, given everyone who's being drafted from the Dub this year and how good they are at shooting. He's up there. Playmaking's insane. He's able to pull off moves sometimes that really just get you out of your seat and wondering what the hell just happened. So he's got a fantastic skill set, and I think he's gonna work on his inconsistencies, and obviously the size is a concern at 5'10". But the way he plays is just so mesmerizing and enticing that if you pick him up at 34th, you're sold on him. And Jaden Perron is kind of the more well-rounded player in this draft. I have a very difficult time naming a weakness of his. Maybe his top speed needs to come a couple notches, but I think that's going to come with time as he bulks up. But defensively, he's superb. Physically, he's amazing. For a small guy who's 5'9", 150 pounds, he can fight off 6 foot 200 pound defenseman, no problem. Really good in his mechanics, the way that he fights for pucks, just outworks players regularly. And on top of that, he's got some of the best hands in the draft and a really good shot as well, as long, along to go with his playmaking. All of it's just so well-rounded with Jaden Perron that I've seen him outside the top 100 on Corey Proman's rankings. I really don't get it. I think he's 12th or 13th on my rankings. So big discrepancy there. He's all over the place in rankings, but at 34, I think you can start to consider him and say, yeah, you're getting a good player out of that. Especially with the fact that he's going to be playing the NCAA next year. And I think that's when we're really going to see the best out of Perron. He's from a great program as well, with the Chicago Steel. The Chicago Steel are excellent at developing players. that have translatable elements. And Perron, he's such a Chicago Steel player, undersized, really good in board battles for his size, outworks opponents. Really, really great skills as well, and great habits with the puck. Cuts to the inside, plays between checks, loves to play give and go. He's a type of guy who I don't feel really plays a junior game. And usually guys of his size playing in the USHL and with the skill set that he has, usually those guys can get away with playing a junior game, but he's not content with getting away with playing the game. He's constantly trying to find ways to tweak his game in order to improve, and he's improved as the year went on as well. So he's one guy I'm really keeping an eye on to see where he goes, because I feel like that's going to reflect the current landscape of NHL scouting and where NHL hired scouts stand on smaller players who have all the elements to succeed.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like every time there's a good USHL player, if they're not in the US NDTP, they're coming from the Chicago Steel. I feel like every year I hear about the Chicago Steel. And actually a friend of mine used to cover the Chicago Steel. And again, it just every time I feel like it's a league and a team that's really kind of come a long way, even in the last 5 years, which is really fun. I think there should be more options than just NCAA and CHL, personally speaking.
Yeah. Usually what happens there is just because the NTDP gets dibs on all the Americans. And then once they filled out their lineup, everyone else goes elsewhere. But any Canadian or any European prospect who comes overseas to play in the USHL, they can't go to the NTDP. They have to go with one of those parallel teams. And it's because more and more foreign prospects are coming to the USHL to kind of develop. That's why we're seeing that progression, because Jaden Perron's Canadian. He wouldn't have been able to be eligible for the NTDP. There are a bunch of guys like that who, since they're not born in the U.S., have to play with non-NTDP USHL teams, and that's why the level's gone better. And it's been really impressive, really. This league's come along so much, and it's not just the Steel. There are a couple other teams, the Muskegon Lumberjacks, Tri-City Storm, etc., which have come a long way in developing and how they develop. It's not just let's play our players in the positions that they're comfortable and put them in situations they're used to. They're challenging players, putting them in situations that they're not used to, and you get a great product out of that.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like if Perron or especially Cristal, I think I'm really high on Andrew Cristal. If he's available at 34, you break your ankles getting to the podium. I know they don't announce like that in the second round, but I think if either of those guys is available, you run and you don't stop running until you get to the podium.
Absolutely.
That's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow we are going to be talking about another draft eligible prospect. We are going to be talking about Bradley Nadeau, who plays in the BCHL. We got some super exciting stuff from Hadi on that. So that's coming up tomorrow. And for the rest of the week, we've got more super exciting draft content. And also, don't forget, our mock draft special is coming out later today, actually. Make sure you check that out. The hosts of Locked On NHL channel have made their picks. Hosts Gil Martin and Hadi Kalakeche break down every selection over a 3-day mock draft event. Part 1, covering the top 10 picks, is available today free on the Locked On NHL YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube. So thanks for making us your first listen. And hopefully, Locked On NHL will be your second listen. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster. You can find Hayden, who will be back next week. He's on vacation this week. You can find him at Hayden H971 on Twitter. You can find Hadi at HadiK_scouting on Twitter. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, email us at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.